You think you miss them. Their voice, their presence, the way they said your name, the way the silence between you felt comfortable instead of empty. But here's the uncomfortable question you've been avoiding. What if you don't actually miss them at all? What if what you're grieving is not a person, but a version of yourself that no longer exists? Let that land for a moment. Most people spend months, sometimes years, believing they're mourning someone. They replay conversations. They check old photos. They wonder if they should reach out. They romanticize the past until it becomes unrecognizable. But here's what they don't realize. They're not mourning the person. They're mourning a version of themselves they used to be, a feeling they used to have access, tone, identity that was built around someone else, a future they had already mentally moved into. And that distinction, however subtle, is the difference between staying stuck and actually healing. Because here's something psychology understands that most people don't. Relationships don't just make you feel good. They quietly reshape your identity. Without your permission, without your awareness. Over weeks and months, your brain begins to associate this person with emotional safety, daily structure, self-worth, purpose of validation, predictability. You stop being just you. You become you plus them. It's not romantic, it's neurological. Your brain builds neural pathways that wire the other person into your sense of self. Their presence becomes part of your internal GPS. So when they leave, it's not just an emotional loss. It's a disorientation of identity. Suddenly, your routines feel meaningless, your thoughts feel unfamiliar, your phone feels silent, your future feels blank, you feel like a stranger to yourself. Not because they were perfect, not because the relationship was healthy, not because you should go back, but because your mind connected them to stability. And stability, even painful stability, is something the human brain clings to. Let me give you some examples that might feel uncomfortably familiar. You replay old memories, not the difficult parts, but the moments. Late-night conversations that made you feel seen, the feeling of being chosen. The way life felt more vivid when they were around. The version of yourself that was more patient, more hopeful, more alive. You don't find yourself remembering the arguments. You find yourself remembering who you were during that time. You miss how confident you felt because someone made you feel wanted, how optimistic you felt because the future seemed certain, how emotionally alive you felt because your nervous system was constantly stimulated, how safe you felt because your identity was borrowed from theirs. And here's where it gets dangerous. This is why people return to relationships they already know are unhealthy. Not because they're weak, but because the familiarity of emotional chaos feels safer than the unfamiliarity of emotional emptiness. Your brain would rather return to a known pain than sit in an unknown quiet. Now let me take you deeper into what's actually happening. Your brain doesn't just get attached to people. It gets attached to patterns. The daily texts, the anticipation, the emotional highs, the feeling of being pursued, the comfort of being known. These patterns create emotional addiction loops. When you receive attention, your brain releases dopamine. When you feel emotionally safe, your brain releases oxytocin. When you anticipate seeing them, your nervous system activates with pleasurable tension. And over time, your brain builds a dependency on these patterns. So when the relationship ends, it's not just grief. It's withdrawal. That hollow feeling in your chest, that emptiness that makes everything feel pointless, that urge to reach out even when you know you shouldn't. That's not love. That's your nervous system reacting to the sudden removal of emotional stimulation that was wired into your identity. This is why heartbreak can feel physical. Your brain processes emotional loss through the same pathways it processes physical pain. You're not weak for struggling to move on. You're experiencing a biological reaction to identity disruption. Here's the uncomfortable part that most people refuse to admit to themselves. You don't actually want them back. Think about it. If you could have them back exactly as they were, with all the same issues, the same incompatibilities, the same dynamics that made you feel unseen, anxious, or small, would you genuinely choose that? No. You want Certainty back validation back emotional intensity back the version of yourself that felt whole around them back the future. You had mentally built back the feeling of being wanted back. But here's the distinction that changes everything. That's not the same as wanting them. And this is why memories become dangerous. Because memory is not a recording. Memory is a reconstruction. And the more you replay it, the more your brain edits reality. It softens the conflict. It highlights the highs. It hides the incompatibility. It removes the loneliness you felt even when you were together. And suddenly, you're not missing a person anymore. You're missing an illusion. Healing begins the moment you realize the relationship was not your identity, and neither was the pain. The version of you that existed with them, the version that laughed louder, felt more alive, seemed more certain, that version wasn't fake. But it also wasn't the only version possible. Your brain resists this idea powerfully, because the human mind emotionally clings to what feels familiar, even when it hurts, even when the relationship was draining you, even when you were losing yourself slowly without noticing, even when your intuition knew it was over long before your heart accepted it. Your brain doesn't prioritize happiness. It prioritizes familiarity. And that's why you have to consciously override it. Let me say something that might land deeply. People don't leave relationships. They leave identities. And the reason moving on takes so long is because you're not just grieving a person. You're grieving the morning routine you shared, the inside jokes no one else would understand, the future you had already started living in your mind, the comfort of being truly known by someone, the identity you built around being theirs. So here's the question I want you to sit with. Not to answer quickly, not to dismiss, but to genuinely ask yourself, do you truly miss them? Or do you miss feeling chosen? Feeling important to someone? Feeling emotionally certain about the future? Feeling like a version of yourself still existed? Because those are not the same thing. And confusing them is what keeps people stuck for months, years, sometimes decades. The person you were with them? That version of you existed in relation to them. But that version didn't die when they left. It was just dormant. And the work of healing, the real work, is not getting them back. It's rebuilding your identity without them. It's discovering who you are when no one is watching, what you value when no one is validating you, what you want when no one else's desires are mixed with yours, who you become when you're not borrowing someone else's identity. That version of you, it's not gone. It just needs space, quiet, uncomfortable, unfamiliar space to reemerge. And the hardest part of moving on is not losing the person. It's learning to become someone your brain doesn't yet recognize. Most people spend their heartbreak trying to get back to who they were. But here's the deeper truth. You don't need to go back. You need to go through the silence, through the unfamiliarity, through the identity discomfort. Because on the other side of that grieving process is not the person you lost. It's the person you were becoming all along. And that version of you, they don't need to be found. They need to be built.